All right, so I created this little tiny project just so I could demonstrate new functionality. Try and go through this one step at a time. Um, and the first thing I wanted to point out, it's funny because I've never used this before, and I don't know if anyone else has, but when you have a longitudinal study and you build out your events, there is an option for a custom event label. So, I mean, if you did this in the past, it showed up just in the record status dashboard, perhaps, but they've changed that now. So if I edit this, just this screening event label, and I call it basic information, and I save it. If I go to the record status dashboard now and I look at participant, the custom event label now shows up here. So it's kind of a visual about what event you were in and what event you're entering data into. So it's a new little piece of functionality that I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of in case you're doing a longitudinal study and you maybe at some point you decided you don't like the label that you originally chose. Not that you can't change it, but anyway, I've never used a custom one, but for those of you that have, there is a new piece of functionality. Codebook. Codebook has some new things up here at the top where it shows what instruments and events and languages you have as part of your project. And if you wanted to do some kind of filtering, you might try that. However, there are two filters that can persist, which you may like to use. They're not real, they don't just jump out at you, but it's when viewing the page, collapse. So if you click on all fields, then all your instruments and all the fields underneath it collapse to just show you the instruments. And if you have a large project, a lot of times this is really nice. Now you've been able to click on collapse and expand here, but if you do this and check the box and then leave and then come back to the code book, you'll find that whatever your settings were will persist. So, and this additional tables relates to the events and languages and instruments up here. So these will persist if that's of value to you. If you look at user rights and you click on somebody, if you want to remove them from the project, there now is a button right there. It used to just have edit user privileges and assign to role, but now if you're going to remove them from the project, you can do that here. I'm not a big fan of removing users from projects. I sort of prefer editing the permissions and then expiring their permissions on a certain date. It gives you kind of a history of users that were associated to your project and when they no longer were able to make any additions or changes to your project. So I prefer you use the expiration date. We're getting more and more involved with FDA requirements. So if you're doing an FDA project, it might be useful for you to use, again, this expiration date rather than deleting a user. Doesn't really affect anything in the log. It's not like if you delete a user, everything they did on a project disappears. Everything persists in the log that ever happened, even if the user is no longer showing up. However, again, I prefer the option expiration date. Let's see. Oh, so when you're in your design mode and you open up a instrument for edit, if you have made any fields, required fields, they've moved that red required field out from underneath the label, and they've now added this. I'm sorry, not required identifiers. So if you establish something as an identifier, it will show this little yellow person next to the variable. So this is a new feature you didn't really see before, any indication that a field was an identifier before, unless you opened it up. So this is new.
Will you open up one of the fields?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this what you want?
Yes, exactly. Because I think there is an automatic setting as well. If it looks like it's an identifier, even though you haven't mentioned it as one, it will have that little person icon as well. There's a list in the REDCap general configuration of like date of birth, name, social security number, MRN.
Yeah, that normally that's used in data exports to make sure that you don't export out. I've not yet seen the yellow identifier icon just pop up on its own without it being flagged manually. But again, this is sort of new for me. I just wanted to make sure people were aware that it's here. And if it does show up automatically, then you'll know it was one of those that was predefined as an identifier. It's just that usually they want you to flag them yourself. Although, as Carol was saying, if you're doing a data export, one of the options is was the one I'm looking for.
Known identifiers, I think in the middle. At the top, the first one, known identifier fields.
Those are tagged in the data in the, well, it used to say specifically that it was going to export or de-identify anything that it considered an identifier, but I don't see that right now. I'm not going to belabor it. But anyway, back to there, you can see what the identifiers are. So this is kind of wild. Let's say you have a couple fields and they're yes, no's, and you end up with 4 or 5, and you think, God, why didn't I put those in a matrix instead of doing this as, separate fields? There's now a way to turn this into a matrix. And so if I remember correctly, these are new also. If you haven't figured this out or seen these, there's a checkbox on the right side of all these fields. Used to be if you wanted to do some kind of bulk move or copy or something, and you wanted to do more than one, you had to hold the control key down and try and get the right one. Now, as soon as you click on that box, you get a quick modify field, and there's all kinds of things you can do here. But one of the things is this matrix group thing. So if you click on that, oh, so I'm going to click on both of these and then click on the matrix and then convert this to a matrix. And now you have this set up as a matrix. And you can, as long as the headers or the options are the same for the fields, then it'll just plop it into a matrix. And then once you have a matrix, in case you decide, wait a minute, I don't like that, if you click on the matrix, there's a new button down here that says save and split the matrix back into separate fields. And if you do that, split the matrix, now you have them back as original fields that are separate. So that's the matrix. So the data quality. Okay, so you can use the data quality rule now to specify records and apply. I have some data access groups set up, but you can assign data access groups to certain records here now in the data quality rules, which is also a new feature. If you've used the email log before, it's a way to search for things like stuff in the subject, or if you sent something to somebody. Anyway, that was more accessible, but now you'll find in user rights, if you look at somebody's user rights, you'll see email logging is now a permission. You can't just get it because you have logging permissions. You also need email logging permissions to be able to access that. Let's see here. Oh, and in the email logging, in the type, used to be survey invitations, and there was these breakdowns. Now there are survey notifications and survey confirmation emails as types for you to search for. These are new within the past month or so. So, thought this is kind of wild. You have something open here. Say you've got a lot of fields here and you're trying to scroll around or whatever. If you use the Control G or Command G, depending on whether you have PC or Mac, but if you use Control G, you get a go-to field. And now you can find what fields you want to go to. It's a different form. Bang, you're there. Brings up the modify field in case you want to do something with that. So one of the nice things about this quick modify field thing is if you have multiple fields where you want to apply the same branching logic, now it's a simple matter of just checking the same boxes and changing the branching logic, and either clear it, you can put branching logic in for the same fields, and you don't have to go to each individual field. Nice and sweet and easy. Let's see here. Yeah. let's go back here again. If I want to come here and here and do something with action tags, you can now deactivate an action tag for a field, which means that it will persist as an action tag that's visible, but it won't be applied to the instrument when it's being loaded, or you hit the field. Like if you had a calc text field or something like that, you could deactivate that field, and then at some later point, if you wanted to reactivate it, you could do that. So that's one of these new features with the quick modify fields. Oh, took me a few minutes to find this. Although I suppose it shouldn't. I mean, you can play around here and see, you could set bulk fields to identifiers or remove them as identifiers. You can set them as required or remove the required option. But up here, there is it looks like, oh, you're going to increase the size of the screen. In fact, when you open it up, it gives you all of these different options, so you can select all the fields that are radio buttons or all the fields that are true false. Anyway, you can go through and you can turn them on or turn them off based on what you've selected here. So if you want greater functionality than just selecting one, you can do that again using this. Normally it means to expand the size of the window, but in this case it gives you all these other options that aren't visible up front. The other feature, and this would have confused the heck out of me if I wouldn't have read about it, I frequently will look at something and want to reorder my fields for whatever reason. Used to be you held the control key down and you put your cursor in front of it and it would turn into a four-sided arrow. You hold your mouse key down and drag it around. Well, you don't do that anymore. So if you want to move something, and if you wanted to move a couple things, all you have to do is click and hold. Whoops. Am I right here?
You were on copy, not move.
Where am I? Oh, I wanted, yeah, move field. So now you can move it. My bad. Thank you. So if you want to move multiple fields at once or one field at a time, just select the one you want to move and move it where you want. So it's no longer, everything is being done now by clicking these quick modify fields on using the checkbox on the right side. Let's see. What did I want to show you here? No. This is not what I wanted to show you. So I don't know how many of you have used when you go to additional customizations, one of the options is for instead of using the little field comment bubbles underneath the history, you can use the data resolution workflow, which is a lot more comprehensive. But the new option is this one below it, which allows you to hide or close verified data queries. So if you haven't used the data resolution workflow, it allows you to identify a field that you have a question about the data that's in there or something, and it creates a basically a log of questions that need resolved. You can pick who you want to have answer the questions. You can identify people that have access to the data resolution workflow. That's a whole thing that I don't really want to, I mean, it's a whole thing we could teach on data resolution workflow. Very powerful. It's great. A lot of auditors really like when it's set up to this data resolution workflow. But the one thing it does in the past, it showed all the queries that were there, and you'd have to manually go through and hide them if you wanted to do that. But now you can hide them automatically. But the default is this field comment log, so that's what shows that bubble that you see. It replaces this bubble right here. And I don't know what I did here. Oh, I must have copied this. Okay. All right. So this is going to get us now into the new e-consent framework. I'm going to do what I can, make sure that you understand the basics of the changes. I am not an expert in this yet. I will try to learn more. But I have tried dozens of different ways of going about things to try and learn the nuances of it. I will tell you that well, first of all, let's just go to the how you do this. So in the past, I'm going to go to my instruments here. In the past, you would go to survey settings, and at the bottom, you would make all your changes to the e-consent framework. That's gone. So if you're looking for e-consent, nothing is there regarding e-consent. There is now an e-consent button on the data collection instruments page, the online designer. And so when you click this, I really should probably start from scratch. Oh, God, I don't even know how to do that. Let me try and turn this off. Okay. Nope. Okay, I'm going to come back here. I've got a consent form already set up. Let's take a look at it real quick. It's very, very basic. It looks like this. Do you consent to all you have read about this study? I mean, I just stuck that in there. And then I put a couple descriptive text fields. One is called consent_text. You can call this whatever you want. You'll see how it's used in a second. I added version. There's a new action tag called consent version. I have no idea how this works yet. I'm still playing with this. So if you see in the REDCap changes that they have added this, if you look in your action tags, you'll see consent version. I have no idea how it works yet. And then just consent date and signature and saving a hard copy of the consent. Not that you necessarily need to do that, but some people like to do that because it's already going to be saved in the file repository, of course. Same functionality. It's just, you're going to find that it is just not the same. So I'm in playing around with it, the best way seems to be the most painful way. Adding a consent form. It's not really painful, but you'll see what I mean. Really, this is all there is to a consent form. It keeps all the format of what you've created. So on my consent form here, I have these fields. I mean, none of these are going to go away just because I'm using the eConsent framework. So they will still show up. But if I go to the eConsent and I'm going to need to add a consent form. You can't. So here's the edit settings. The edit settings are the basic ones that were at the base of the survey configuration page. So, you know, you had your first name, you're identifying these fields where they are, the date of birth field if it exists. 2 new additions, you can put a you can put text for a footer for your eConsent, and you can do a header. So I didn't really play around with this too much. It's a little esoteric, but you know, it shows here that you could do the PID, the project ID, last name, whatever. It takes smart variables. So these are things that make it clearer, maybe, about what's on that particular eConsent. And then down here, where's your signature field? You can have multiple signature fields. So if you wanted to identify, like you had a child and the child signs, and then you want the mother to sign, and you know, then you can have multiple signature fields. I know somebody's going to ask me, what about signature for coordinator? And I don't have the answer to that. There's an implication in the video, which I'll show you where to see that. There's an implication in the video that you can do that. But as I told my staff earlier, and I'm too bad this is going to be taped, but that video is terrible. You remember the if you've listened to commercials for people selling cars, at the end, some guy speaks so fast that you can barely understand a word they say. This person goes through the video so fast, you're trying to see what is happening, and it basically shows you some fields, but there's no serious content. So you can watch the video if you want, but I found it to be useless. Except that there are images on there that I have no idea how they got to. Anyway, so we're here where to save the signed consent. If you want to, I mean, it's by default, it's going to go to the file repository. I added in the current event to the field hard copy, which I showed you was at the bottom of that consent form. And that's just a saved hard copy. And then you can also store translated versions now of the PDF if you're using the MLM option. And then you can make customized snapshot file names and notes and all this. So, you know, you can save your settings then, which doesn't give you a consent text. So I get the impression that there's more than one way of doing this, but it appears that the best, and this is where it became painful for me, way is to use the add consent form. So when you add the consent form, this is where you put your version. And the version of your consent, if you have multiple versions, is very important. And this feature is very nice. And it doesn't seem like it's all that difficult when you look at it, but I'll show you why it's painful in a second. All right, so I'm going to do version 3.5. It wants to know where I want to put the text or the PDF on the consent form. And I have a descriptive text called consent_text. I mean, it's in the drop down. I just grabbed that, and that's where what we put below here is where that's going to show up. You can have DAG specific consents. Now, this would have been great. We had a project recently where they wanted specific consents. We had to study 4 different DAGs. Each one wanted their own consents. So we had to build 4 separate ones in different forms and all that, because that's the only way you could do it. But now you can build them in here, and probably a little less painful than having to build them out into separate instruments or whatever. Then you can also set what language. So we've had multiple studies where consents are in different language. So you can, once you've determined your language, you can say whether it's in English or whether it's Spanish. It'll take the translations in the MLM and just plug them in. For the questions, you know, on the form, I mean, you're going to still have to translate the body of your consent and plug in a Spanish or English version. But all those questions that are on the instrument will be translated automatically based on what language you put on here. Then for the consent, they'll have to pick what language they want it to be in, but that's a whole separate issue. Now we get to the consent form. Now this is where, you know, it's embarrassing because it kind of shows how I don't read things very quickly. I just assume things. There are 2 tabs here. There's a rich text consent form where you're going to type in exactly what you want in the format that you wanted. Then there's a consent form inline PDF. Do not mistake this for inline image, which is what, and you know, it was a good learning experience for me. So I took a consent that I knew was in one of our projects. I right-clicked it. It was an image, and I pasted it in here. And you know, I had to adjust it because when I view it, all right, you can view an image. I wish I could show you these easily. You can view an image on your survey. Okay. When somebody's got the survey open for the consent and they look at it, they'll see all the fields. They'll see the consent text from the image. They'll see all that. They'll sign it. It looks perfect. And then when you go to having them sign the e-consent where they're verifying what they're signing, there is no body of text there. Even though you saw it on the survey, the e-consent doesn't show it. And I'm like beating my head against the wall. Why in the world does it not show that? Well, it is pretty clear here. It only says rich text and PDFs. As soon as I put a PDF in this space, everything worked perfectly. Shows up in the e-consent. So I'm going to click on this. I'll choose some file as a PDF. Oh gosh, I don't know what I choose. Oh, I know what I ended up choosing before. I don't know what this is. Oh, it's too big. I don't know what this is either. I should really know before I do this, but all right. So I chose the PDF and now I'm going to add a new consent form. So what I just put in there, if I look at all the versions, I'm going to have a problem. And I found this out when I was doing the last PDF. You want to make sure that the one that you don't want is inactive. This does allow you, however, to set up your next version without it being live, because it will, if both of these are active, it'll use the one that's of the lower version first. And it would have shown that with a checkbox. I didn't look there, but you can tell by whatever is checked, that's the active version. So anyway, I've got this, whatever this response survey is now. So if I go to the if I go to my survey, go to the record status dashboard, I think no, there's not. All right. I'll do a new record. All right. Give it a second. There is the PDF for the consent. All right. You go through here, put in your signature, and go to the next page. And there is your signed PDF, and it has the version at the bottom. There's your signature, all of that stuff. So it adds what version, make sure that you know what version, you certify it, you submit it. And then if we go to the record status dashboard, open up the record, we can make sure that we see what version they signed. We can also look at the hard copy of this. So there's that. And we'll go to our file repository and PDF snapshots. And here's our latest one for Tanya. And there's everything that we want. So everything is saved the way it's supposed to. One comment that it's kind of disappointing. I would prefer that when you open any file that it automatically opens in a new tab. This does not. So if you're trying to stay within the record, don't just close the tab, because then you have to go back and open up REDCap. All right, so that's how you can create a e-consent. So I want to come in here. To do this, I have to go back to my instruments. All right. So let's say I haven't even used 3.5 yet. I think, oh, I made a mistake on my consent. I just need to change. I misspelled a word. So I come into my e-consent. I'm going to change and edit that e-consent. And I open this up. This is what you get. There is no way to edit a consent that you've created, a version. This is, I'm sure, a good thing. It prevents any screwing around with versions that you've created. It makes you create a whole brand new version. Just be aware of that, because you're not going to find a way to get to edit an existing consent or go back and do something with a consent in the past. Every time you want to make a change, you have to create a new version by adding a consent form. And again, you can view all the versions. I don't know how you actually view what is here, but I mean, I would say that you could, if you saw a version and then somebody entered it, and you could click on the PDF and you would see what that version looked like. And the reason, just so you know, the reason you see all these others as blank is because I didn't know what I was doing until I finally figured out that I needed to put a PDF and not an image in there. I don't find that there are any useful instructions on how to use this. One of the comments about it that I think is really important is this new e-consent version meets regulatory standards such as ICH and FDA requirements with robust version control and audit trails, which, as you can see, it certainly does by requiring any change to have its own consent with its own version and all that. I just guess I wanted to make sure that you saw that you can put, notes on here, and I told you about the headers and footers that you can put on here. Oh, also, when somebody fills out a consent, it will show you right at the top what version they filled out. So version control and audit control, consent version, all that shows up. Can't remember, did I fill out a new record? I think I did here. So bang, you can see this version is 3.5. So easy way to see what consent somebody filled out. And I named this 3.5. You could name, it suggests you don't use the V in front of it. But, if you had Spanish versions and English versions, it allows you to start building all of this in and keeping them active or whatever. Online amusement. Oh, also, well, I should have probably told you this earlier. I'll come back to the consent in a minute. If you're moving something, when you're moving a field, all right, so let's say I want to move ethnicity, and I click on this. Note that in the past, you could never move a field to the top of another instrument. So they've added this new feature. So if you want to insert a field at the top of an instrument, you can. And if you want to create a whole new instrument with this field that you're moving, you can do that also. So this is new functionality also. But I think the most important message I have for today is the consents. And Jeanette, don't worry about the past. There's no need to worry about you don't want to change anything from the past. This is just for going forward. You are correct. And I just was very afraid that somebody's going to need to build an e-consent and they're going to be lost. And it took me a while to figure out, for example, oh, it's not what I want. So on my consent form, how to set up my field here, I need to build in this descriptive text field, nothing in it, just a placeholder, descriptive text with a variable name. And then when it's time and you come in here and you're going to, I keep going to this or my survey settings or whatever, I got to get used to always going to the e-consent. It's a different, you're almost programmed to go to the survey settings. But anyway, when you come in here, then you need to know when you create a new consent, where are you going to put all this text? And that's why you're creating that descriptive text field first, so you can then, whatever you put in here will fall into that descriptive text field. And it works nice. And if you want to work with the DAGs or languages, you can do that. That's outside the scope of this little demonstration. Just wanted to get people started on this because, and I probably will post on the REDCap site, when you first log into REDCap, there'll be a little link that says, here's how you do e-consents and gives you a little overview. But like when I think of alerts and notifications, or I think of the multi-language management module, there are a lot of nuances that you have to learn sort of by using them. And the more you use them, the better you get at it. And of course, when they first rolled out e-consent in the surveys, it took just a little bit to figure out how to do it. And then versions were nightmarish, how to do versions and then add in different languages. This should be so much more useful for, as I said, FDA kind of requirements. We're just starting to deal with some of the audits regarding FDA REDCap projects, and some of the builds don't conform enough to FDA standards. REDCap has the ability to address any FDA requirement, but you have to understand what the requirements are so that you build it correctly when you build your project. So as much of a little learning curve as I felt this took, I do believe that it will address some of the failures in design for that meet FDA requirements. I hope all that was clear. It was kind of clear in my head. So does anyone have any questions? Good. I think I can answer questions, but again, just like this at consent version, I couldn't get that to work into anything. So if anybody's playing, especially people from my team, I have a list of things that I addressed. There's not a lot that I didn't address, but like at consent version was one of those things. PDF snapshots at different points of time. This is another thing I will try to maybe get more information for you for next week. But basically, it allows you to set up triggers that will take snapshots of instruments or whatever and save them as PDFs. So this is a new feature called Snapshot Scope, I think, for PDFs. And we'll try and look into that a little bit more next week. We're out of time, unless you have a question. Otherwise, I hope to see you next week for the Red Zone. Thank you all for your patience and your time. I hope this was useful for you with all the new functionality. I'll try to keep up a little bit better in the future so we don't hit you with all of this at once. But I'm very impressed with the functionality they have rolled out. I will see you next week. Have a great weekend.